This is the E380, and you would think it would be an information technology related thing, and it actually is, even though it gets there by a kind of weird route. So again, as I was explaining beforehand, this actually started when I was asked to be a skeptical discussant for EE380 in 2001 for Stephen Schneider talking about climate and uncertainty. And I ended up getting involved in this stuff, and what I've ended up doing is studying the mechanisms by which people create fog around reality. And sort of money comes in and fog comes out. It turns out that
John, because of what Carl said, you should explain who Steve Schneider is.
Yeah, okay. So Steve Schneider was a great Stanford climate scientist and communicator who sadly was deceased in 2010. And it was a big loss to the world. But that's what got me involved. Because you might ask, why is a computer scientist in this? Anyway, it turns out that big tobacco and big fossil are very good gears in the wheels of the machineries that create disinformation. They're also very good at using the latest technologies. They pick them up really fast. Okay? And I'll give some examples of that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is sort of introduce myself. I'll talk a little bit about climate change science, not much because it's pretty clear. Mostly I'll talk about the anti-science machineries of doubt. Doubt is often almost better than disinformation, right? And it's easier to create. Right? So an awful lot of things are there not to convince somebody of the truth of something else, to just make them doubt the fairly clear realities. So some of this gets pretty deep into politics. There's a lot of room in real politics for differences of opinion, but often politics is used to actually, be in complete denial about clear facts. There's enough unclear things that one can have decent arguments with people of different views, but there are some things where, basic physics is something you don't really argue about. So the tobacco folks have been doing anti-science for a long time. Environmental anti-science has picked that up, and certainly it's got a tight relationship with politics. I'll give some examples of things. You might be surprised to find that Joe Camel, anybody remember Joe Camel? Okay, innocent, okay, not really created to get teenagers, okay? By the way, mercury in your fish is fine. There's no such thing as global warming, okay, all right. I'll talk a little bit about the Minnesota social cost of carbon case. That's actually related here to Stanford, given the strong efforts in the Energy Modeling Forum. Anyway, there's a big entangling with politics. One of the sad things is that politics has been overloaded to get people to disbelieve science, that 20 or 30 years ago there was not such a split, but you find a lot of split now. We'll talk a little bit in the middle of things, but also at the end of the applications in the internet age. We'll talk a little bit on throwing rocks in the gears, and we'll go from there. So
there was also, by the way, a new book which just came out, Not a Scientist, which had a book signing event up in Berkeley last evening.
Yes.
So I'm just...
Okay, you put that in. All right. Okay, so here's a little background. I grew up on a small farm in western Pennsylvania, which is a funny place because it's at the corner of being farmland from Ohio, being steel from Pittsburgh, being coal from Appalachia, and of course this is the home of the Marcellus Shale, and oil was discovered, not too far north of there. Okay, so it's a funny kind of place. Went to Penn State, got recruited to go to Bell Labs. Spent 10 years there. The license plate is my license plate. Still have that. I came out here when the Bell system was breaking up, did various things at various companies, at least some of which I'd see enough old timers here you've probably heard of. And then I had a heart attack in 95, and eventually my cardiologist said, stop being stupid and do something else than being a chief scientist at Silicon Graphics. So I finally did. And I sort of did the typical semi-retired thing that senior techies do here. I'm a trustee at the museum. I'm on advisory boards for startups. We ski and hike and do stuff. But then I got pulled into this whole climate stuff starting in 2001. First in trying to understand the science, and then being very puzzled about why the obvious science wasn't being acted on. And I ended up getting deeper and deeper into the study of the disinformation industry. And what I end up doing these days is I do sort of investigative journalism and publish things, reports on that stuff. Here are some books. You might just take a look at these. These are background. Now, I'll note this presentation, some of it will be smaller letters than you can possibly read. This is, I provide the PDF. It's more of a backup thing. You can go search for things. These are all good books. A whole lot of them are by friends of mine. I know almost everybody here. And they come at the disinformation problem from different directions. But they're well worth reading. For instance, Robert Proctor is a professor here of history. He's probably the leading historian about the tobacco industry, and that's a really thick book. I thought I knew this turf pretty well. He had so much more, just quite amazing. Let's see, certainly, I don't know, how many people have either read or seen the movie Merchants of Doubt? Anybody? That's a good one to see, okay, right? The movie has some different stuff in it that's not in the book, and it's, if you're not around this turf, it's a real eye-opener. Now, I may be biased because I'm acknowledged in the book because I spent a lot of time helping them out. I actually got involved with that because I was trying to track the attacks on one of the authors, Naomi Oreskes, of looking at how information flowed around the internet, because there was disinformation rapidly flowing around. And if you were watching it while it was going on, you could see which blogs and websites were watching each other, because you could see bad memes flowing around, okay? And I, being an old information guy, I thought that was kind of interesting to see. Okay, so anyway, those are some good sources to read, and they're kind of depressing, but they're worth reading. Okay, these are just lists of some things that I've done. There's like thousands of pages. Just an example, the Earth is getting warmer. We're doing it. It's really raw basic physics. It's been around for over 100 years. And, we are rapidly heading for a climate on Earth that we haven't seen for millions of years, okay, right? And, I guess in some places that'll be better. It's kind of too bad for Miami. It won't help us here in the Bay Area either. The physics is pretty solid. The evidence is very consistent with the physics, so it's going on. So this is the kind of thing, you'd think this would be hard to create doubt about, but you find a large number of people don't believe it. In fact, it turns out that an awful lot of what goes around in terms of doubt creation gets used again and again. So this is a great website by Skeptic Science, and I'm one of the team on this thing. And what they do is collect arguments that keep appearing again and again and give them numbers. This is sort of like the old joke about jokes that, every joke has a number, okay? So now you can just say 20 and everybody will laugh, okay? Well, that's like this, okay, right? Like here were the top 5 and the oldest ones, and what's in this website is a quick description, a little longer description, and then links to web pages that go through, sometimes in different layers of detail, right, what this is about, okay, right? The thing is, these things get used again and again and again. They appear, well, they've been in the Wall Street Journal op-eds for a long time, and sadly right now they're actually appearing in the New York Times op-eds, a fellow named Bret Stephens, okay, right? And it's just, the same wrong stuff gets repeated again and again. Okay, now, you can sort of categorize things. Science, a lot of people here are science folks, right? And I had an analogy of the Great Wall, which it says, Science is like a wall that gets built up over time. You may be able to kick away a stone or two, and some of the things are loose, but after something's been there and cemented in place for hundreds of years, it's kind of pretty solid. It doesn't just all fall down because you find something a little wrong. Then there's pseudoscience, which in which somebody has an idea that they really, really want to convince scientists is true. Right? And serious skeptics look at this stuff, and it turns out not to be any evidence, but it still comes back. ESP, astrology, cycles everywhere. There's a guy who thinks the sun is made of iron. He also doesn't believe in climate change. Right? There's a whole bunch of folks that do what you call climastrology, where they look at cycles of the planets and everything, and they determine that global warming is all caused by where Jupiter and Saturn happen to be. Okay, right? Oh, all right. So this, of course, in the medical business is useful for cures. I mean, you can prove all kinds of things. If you want to read some examples of this, take a look for the Journal of Scientific Exploration. Okay, it's got many good things on ESP, reincarnation, astrology, etc. My favorite is the one that studied 500 Parisian puppies and found that their personalities matched their astrological signs. Okay, all right, good.
However, we do know that hockey expertise does correlate well with astrological signs.
Oh, it does. Okay, well,
it determines when you go into the league. Whether you're big or small.
Yes, okay. Well, that could be. All right. There are strange things. Anyway, this, by the way, was quoted as a crucial source by various folks attacking the climate hockey stick. How many people know the hockey stick? Okay, right. Some of you do, right? Okay. Well, the Journal of Scientific Exploration was quoted in that. Okay, then there's science noise. I don't know of a real formal title for this, but this is the classic problem that you start with science, it goes through the media, and then with no ill will whatsoever gets mangled, right? Not all scientists are great communicators. One of the things I really admired about Steve Schneider that I mentioned is he could communicate to audiences of greatly varying expertise, which is really hard, right? Now, admittedly, one of his relatives told me, well, what would you expect? When he came out of the womb, he was talking to everybody who would listen, right? So, not everybody has that advantage. Now, anti-science is different from any of these. It sometimes uses pseudoscience. They will latch on to anything that sounds like it goes against the mainstream views. But it's more intended to obscure science because there's some policy that's not wished, right? Nobody bothers with things like, a cosmology that don't affect, what policies one has. So it turns out that, and I've done a lot of time looking at this, most of these anti-science memes, like those arguments I showed, are created by a fairly small handful of professionals who do this. But then the whole issue is, how do you propagate that through the blogosphere, through the internet, and so forth, right? Most of the people repeating them did not create them in the first place, right? But it's a very well done effort at dissemination. So here's the overall structure, which is you would like real science to feed into reviews, and you get assessment reports, and that should go into government and publics. And if there's something relevant, you go through the political process, and out comes policies, based on the best science that you've got. But if you don't like how that will end up, then what you try to do is create as much fog as you can. Here, you say things like, oh, well, forget this, we need more research. One of the interesting things is more research indefinitely means you never, ever do anything. Okay, right? That's always a good one, because you could say, well, we really need more research. Now, how many science papers end with more research is needed? Yes. All of them, yes, okay. So it's
funding, actually.
Yeah, well, more funding. Yeah, no, okay. Too many gray hairs here. Yes.
How do you select 1990? I was just sort of curious.
Let's see. Because, for instance, the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, was actually started under George H.W. Bush, okay, right? And if you backtrack about then, there was not a real strong visible split, okay, right? Now, it may have gotten fired up around 1988 when James Hansen talked about climate in Congress, but I mean, this is approximate, okay? So all I'm saying is it was a far less evident split than it is today. But you're looking.
I mean, I just had to become a nuclear engineering major in 1970 because of this. I mean, that's okay. Keep going.
Okay, all right. Okay. Well, all right. So I would observe. I want to be really clear, okay, right? I mean, there's been a clear split, and I'll show plenty of examples where whether or not climate scientists is true has gotten tightly tied to political beliefs, okay, right? And I just want to be clear, there are plenty of Republicans who are actually decent defenders of science, okay, right? Sherwood Boehlert was a Republican from New York in Congress, terrific. Every scientist I know thinks the world of him, okay, right? Bob Inglis lost his job in South Carolina because he actually went to Antarctica and learned about climate. If you saw Merchants of Doubt, really moving section of him trying to convince people, right? So, and George Shultz, is quite amazing, right? But by now, it's really gotten heavily tied to politics, right? And I'll show, there are plenty of studies on that. Okay, now the modern stuff is, let me tell you, the cigarette guys are the best marketeers on the planet, right? And they got in 1954, they were seeing that the science was getting really against them, all right? And they put together materials, Hill and Knowlton's, big PR firm, and these were the tactics to be used when you know that the science is against you. The evidence is inconclusive. Well, it's something else, okay, right? It's all statistics, blah, blah, blah. Okay, and more research is necessary. And by the way, all of this stuff is coming back for electronic cigarettes, right? And I'll go into that some, right? But you could see a repeat of all the same stuff, right? It's interesting. Now, what's interesting too is that often the people being used to push the ideas are some of the same people, certainly some of the same organizations. There's quite a few think tanks out there that if you look at what they actually do, they're more like PR lobbying agencies, right? And they get a lot of money from both fossil and tobacco folks. These things are, by the way, mostly 501c3 nonprofits. They're not supposed to do certain things. Nevertheless, they do a whole lot of things. And I will note this, because a very good climate scientist named David Titley, anybody know that name? Okay, he was like the chief oceanographer in the Navy. And he's, after years, Admiral Titley retired. He's at Penn State these days, and I know him. And he reminded me that, I mean, he's affiliated with the Hoover Institution here, is that not all of the think tanks, do all of this PR lobbying stuff. And actually, Hoover, I've looked pretty hard. I haven't seen much from them of this. All right. Of course, they preceded the huge wave of Koch-based think tanks that came from the 80s and 90s. So, it's just really weird, though, too. Here are these conservative libertarian think tanks, and it appears that a value is to be able to help the tobacco industry addict teenagers. Right? I mean, I'll show you some examples. That seems very weird. Now, of course, there are some earlier things like lead. The lead guys, were pretty good at this too. I think what the tobacco folks brought to the party was terrific marketing. Lead guys were not really good marketeers. Right? Tobacco folks are incredibly good. They're actually really good big data folks too, by the way. Right? You'd be amazed the details that they keep tracking, like literally how much space is in every gas station. I mean, they're really good. Okay, now here, you can't possibly read this, just look at the red, okay? What I did is take a page from Bob Proctor's book, where he looked at the tobacco playbook on the left, and with Bob's permission, I just took that and edited in to put the red to be what's the modern equivalent for the fossil guys. So the main thing is, gee, it's all the same playbook, right? So, you know, you can go look at the references if you care to see what the details are. But the thing is, it wasn't a hard edit. I mean, you know, I took the page, scanned it in, and then copied it and edited it in, 20 minutes. So it wasn't hard. Okay, now, back to the think tanks. Think tanks have been taking money from the tobacco guys for a long time. Real interesting thing, well, some of the data runs out around 2001, 2002, but we noticed something that think tanks around the first half of 2013 that for years have been defending the tobacco companies, all of a sudden all started to say, well, smoking is bad and that's why e-cigarettes can help people. Okay? Now, right by some coincidence, that was right when the major tobacco companies who fund these guys all decided they needed to have e-cigarettes. What a funny coincidence, okay, right? And it was a very knife-edge sharp change of what they were saying. Clearly, somebody told them the message, you gotta get on board with what we're actually gonna do. So, anyway, e-cigarettes are really fun. There's a great website here at Stanford called SRITA, right, which has a whole lot of the marketing materials from cigarettes and e-cigarettes and comparisons of where they reuse the old marketing themes for e-cigarettes, great retread materials. There's great stuff like, there's hundreds of flavors of this stuff, bubble gum, cotton candy, gummy bears, probably my favorite. By the way, all of these are really designed to help adults quit smoking. Okay, got that? Okay, right. Okay, they're not to capture teenagers, not at all, no chance. Okay, right. And actually, of course, that's what they're for. Teenage smoking rates have been slowly going down, and then in the last couple of years, the e-cigarette use has gone up pretty fast. Now later, for little older ones, sex sells, okay, right? And there's some amazing internet commercials. That's about all I can say. I probably couldn't show them here, okay, right? But they work on them. This one here says, after a steamy hotel scene, says, "Save humanity, start vaping." Okay, the vapor comes out and forms these things. It's good graphics. Okay, now some of these are sold as being high tech. Google's e-cigarette microcontroller. Okay, right? A bunch of these things have very small, cheap micros in, and they use that as a marketing thing. That's to control the.
Would Google get into this?
No, it's not Google. I just mean Google. Search this. Sorry, Google is not making e-cigs. Okay.
Let's clarify.
I hope not. Okay. Anyway, they are great marketeers, but nobody trusts them. So you always want independent-looking third parties. Okay, right? And that's what they use the sort of pseudo-academic think tanks for. Right? And there's been a regular progression away from obvious industry groups towards independent things that people might actually believe. Right? They also come out for testimonies. If a legislature is considering doing something, like raising cigarette taxes or raising age to 21, these folks will marshal experts. Right? There's a whole bunch of folks who do this. Interestingly, a whole lot of these folks, they've been in cigarettes for a long time, and now they're in climate stuff as well, right? Now, one of the interesting things was discovered by some friends of mine at UCSF that the Tea Party was really put together by the Koch brothers, one of their think tanks, and a lot of help from big tobacco. In fact, the Tea Party motif came from a PR firm that Philip Morris had. Okay? And then the Kochs hired tobacco marketeers. That's when I discovered, because I recognized a name of a PR firm that I'd heard up at UCSF, and looked the guy up in the tobacco archives up there, and there he was. He's a long-time tobacco helper. And so he, and then he moved over to run communications for Koch Industries.
For those people snapping John's slides, Dennis and I armed with John and other speakers to put the slides online.
Yeah,
So
they'll be
don't
online.
have to-
So don't.
You don't have to snap.
Okay. So here's where the future goes. Okay, these guys are good. ICOS is something they've invested billions of dollars in, and there's a patent from a couple years ago, which basically shows this. With the idea that, gee, there's some kind of smoking device here, and it's got a USB cable over to the PC, and it can do things like download updates and upload data. Okay, right. Now, these things control the puff rate and how much stuff goes in there. Pardon? No Bluetooth. Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, right. Oh, they may do that later. I don't know. Okay. Okay. Now that's not exactly how they worked out. But if you look around for ICOS, that's what these things are called. This is what really came out. This is a thing you puff on. This is the controller for it, and then you have to put it back in this bigger device to recharge it. Okay. But it's got a USB cable that goes to something. Now it could go just to a wall socket to recharge, or it could go to a PC. Okay, right? Well, they want that data. They want that data a lot. They want, pardon? Yeah. Well, yeah, but it works okay, right? And I don't know yet what they actually do, but there's no doubt about it. There's plenty of capability there to gather data about each person's habits who use this, upload it, analyze it, send stuff back to control it. Now, they make suggestions in the patent that they can do things like help people lower their usage, okay, right? And like sort of control the number of puffs you can have in a month and stuff like that. Now, how many people here believe that these will be used to help people stop smoking? Okay. Nobody. Well, what a funny thing. Okay. Anyway, if you Google ICOS, it's not officially here in the U.S. yet, but it's in a bunch of other countries. They're gearing up to have it. Of course, there's a whole raft of patents around this. They'd much rather have a product that people use that's really hard to duplicate. Okay, now let's look at how the whole structure works. And this is an overview, and then I'm going to go through the pieces. At the top, what one finds are corporations and family foundations. Then see this big cloud here? Well, money goes through clouds in funny ways. Sometimes you can find it, sometimes you can't. There's a bunch of cases where I can find about 30% of the money that comes to these think tanks, but not much more, okay? The things that are 501c3s have to file reports every year. I've got like a laptop full of these things, right? And you kind of have to ferret out what they're doing, and it isn't easy. But anyway, money comes in here. It goes also to lobbyists and other folks. Money flows down, and money is black. Red are ideas and memes that get propagated. And then, you come out to the bottom of the public. So let me do the pieces. So at the top, again, here's where the money comes from. It goes through PR agencies, lobbyists. Of course, a lot goes directly to politicians. It goes to think tanks, which tend to have a more permanent existence, like Competitive Enterprise Institute or Cato or whatever. You have front groups that tend to come and go. Right? And they get put together, and you have to figure out who actually runs them. Right? Again, a lot of these come from the wave of think tanks that the Kochs funded. Hoover preceded these and is a bit different. I put that in again because Dave Titley, reminds me that that's fair. Okay, right? There's some others around that are specific to climate. This is the one in the UK. This is a place out in Arizona, the Center for the Study of Carbon Dioxide and Global Change, which never met a CO2 molecule it didn't like a whole lot. Okay, all right. And there's more, right? Now, tobacco sometimes did its own front groups, but these days they generally use their own think tanks for cover. They used to have smokers' rights groups, and those really didn't work. Okay, right? What worked was the Tea Party. Okay, now, This piece is where the ideas come from. And the idea is the more credible sounding somebody can be, the happier they are. So ideally, you get a climate scientist or a medical researcher to help you, okay, right? But those are hard, okay, right? If you look at congressional testimony and other sort of climate dismissive things, there's a pretty small number of people who actually ever had serious credentials in climate. However, even a PhD sounds good. Right? And so you will find all kinds of papers around that are complete nonsense, but having a PhD, means credible. And then you get somebody at least sounds technical, like I'm an engineer, so, that's good enough, right? And otherwise, you just get whoever you can that'll communicate. Over here are real hacks who just do whatever they do for the money, okay? And there's some well-known ones in that category. Okay, so the idea here is this is where all those memes come from, where I showed you the top 5, but there's like hundreds of them, right? And there's a constant flow of these things. So, you get some in the UK. This is the one who got me started chasing this. This Christopher Monckton. Anybody ever hear of this guy? Yes. Okay. Well, he's an interesting guy. He's a British lord who is pretty crazy. Right? That's all I could say. Okay. Now, for the US, there's a great series of things called the Six Americas research thing, where they survey the US and they've clustered people into sort of 6 groups and they ask different questions and see who believes what. The climate denialism stuff focuses on causing confusion for these groups and hoping that some go into what you call dismissive, meaning we absolutely reject it. There's a hardcore of folks who simply just simply do not believe that there is any human influence on climate change. Down here are the folks who actually think that it's real and you have to do something. But the arguments are over the folks in the middle, just like the arguments in politics tend to be over the uncommitted folks in the middle. Now, this used to be just sort of the general print media, but by now the blogosphere and all the online things are serious factors. And that's really only happened over the last 10, 15 years, right? And where there used to be more fact-checking, it's Wild West over there, right? And you can find stuff that would agree with you, no matter what it is. And it's, I would say it's one of the biggest challenges is that human society hasn't yet adapted to figuring out how you easily know whether something is reliable or not, all right? And unfortunately, the folks doing this stuff even got there earlier than folks who were just trying to do their science. Okay, so anyway, there's the whole overall structure. One of the crucial things here is to get support here that filters back up to the politicians. What you want are angry people writing letters to editor and to their local representatives saying, this climate change stuff is a hoax, it's all terrible, Richard Lindzen says so there, okay, right, and constantly sort of supporting the politicians that also may be getting money from up there. Or at least, convincing the people who waver about this. Here was an example of the political split. Larry Hamilton's a sociologist who actually does a lot of Arctic sociology from University of New Hampshire. And they did a really nice thing, is that they split things 4 ways, although the colors sort of aren't your normal thing. It's this Democratic, independent, Republican, except for Tea Party and Tea Party. Now, one of the interesting things here is that when they ask actual questions about the science, like are glaciers decreasing, okay, right, the Tea Party knows the least, but they are the ones who are sure they know the most. Okay? Now, the reason I think that this is pretty important is if you look at the orange and the green, there's actually, fairly substantial difference here. If you only call everything Republicans, I think it masks the fact that there's 2 pretty different populations in there. Right? But again, I think this is something that a lot of it has been created over the last 25 years or so. Because I don't think the Tea Party didn't exist before. Okay. Now, where are these think tanks? These are all research institutes. They just happen to have to be within a couple blocks of Congress. Right? Just where you need research institutes to be. Okay, right? Anyway, K Street's over here, and a whole lot of them are right here. There's a few elsewhere. There's a couple out here in California. There's one in Chicago, but a whole lot of them are in Washington, D.C. Okay, now this is another one. Don't worry about the detail. I went through and looked at, to the extent that I could in 2010 about who was, here were across the top were the think tanks. Going down was known funding. So this was tobacco funding. This was different organizations they were in. This was Exxon, two different views of this. These were key big family foundations. This was Richard Mellon Scaife. Anybody here know that name? Okay, a few of you, okay. I'm a Pittsburgh guy. I've heard of him before. He's a really nice guy. When his wife left him, he put a sign on his front lawn that say, "Have lost wife and dog, a reward for dog." Yeah, nice guy. But he's funded a lot of these things. The Koch guys, of course, have funded a lot. And this was a huge matrix that showed where the money came from and where it went. Okay, right? So it turns out there's about the real paper has about 100 think tanks and maybe 100 different foundations here. The only reason you can find that is because since they use their foundations, they have to report where the money goes. Now, they fixed that later. They created a mechanism by which they could make it anonymous, more or less. Okay. Now, this is one for the tobacco side of this. I was studying the Heartland Institute. Anybody hear of that? Oh, yeah. Great guys. Okay. And I found that there was a tobacco executive named Roy Martin who was on their board for 12 years. Okay. And I said, I'm trying to find money flows, okay? So I said, I wonder if he's in the tobacco archives up at UCSF. He was. Not only that, he was the guy in Philip Morris who gave out money every year to the think tanks. And he had a spreadsheet every year. I said, thank you, you just saved me so much time, okay, right? And most of that was from, most of this is from that thing. You'd be just surprised. There's just, money and lovely comments about who was doing a good job, okay? And begging letters, like, we've really done good stuff for you this year. Give us some more money, okay, right? The tobacco archives up at UCSF are a great source. I wish we had the equivalent for environmental sciences, but we don't, okay, right? There's 90 million pages of internal tobacco company documentation.
That's left over from lawsuits?
Yes, and a lot of it sort of peters out around 2001-ish or so, but still stuff keeps coming in because get the documents is the #1 thing that everybody says. All right? It's always worth doing that. Anyway, it's great data, very clear, in bed with the tobacco industry the whole time. And again, the question was, are they still doing it? And the 2013 thing with e-cigarettes pretty well proved it, because all in lock-sync, they all decided that e-cigarettes were a good thing to help you stop smoking, which suddenly had become bad after all these years. Okay, here's what they do for the money. I found this document in there, and it's great. So they're going to do press releases, they're going to do op-eds, and they're going to do policy briefs and letters to the editor. The one I love the best is, there's letters to congressmen. Let's see. Oh, down towards the bottom, we find this one. I love this. Access to G.W. Bush, okay, when he was a Texas government. Okay. Hey, these are nonprofits, right? Nonprofits, they get a tax break for this stuff, okay? Good. Anyway, this was from a document that was in the tobacco archives. Your main problem with the archives, it's got a very nice search engine, it's publicly available, but you have to craft your queries well to focus in on things. If you put in Exxon, you get 20,000 hits. Interesting. Okay. All right, now here we go. Here's the Heartland Institute. So if you privatize profits and socialize the damages. Heartland can help you. All right. So again, it's a tax-exempt public charity. It was infamous for this big billboard, right, a few years back. Right. This one actually cost them $1 million or $2 of industrial funding. Right. It only lasted a day or two, but you know they put it up outside Chicago. Let's see. There's a letter from the president, Joe Bast, saying Joe Camel was innocent, and there's an article he did, and then he wrote to Philip Morris saying, hey, see the good article we did for Reynolds, you should give us more money. Okay, all right, and that's all sitting there in the thing, and you know, I wrote a long report that has all this good stuff, right? So you know, here's the kind of advertisement, if you remember Joe Camel, you know. Now, who could this possibly be aimed at? All right, I mean, you know, what could I say? Why this, Matt?
Computer geeks.
Pardon?
Retired computer
Retired computer geeks. Yeah, right. Okay, right. Well, okay. So why is this? Well, the crucial thing is something actually most adults don't know, right? Even well-educated folks, is that physiologically it's almost impossible to get addicted to nicotine except during adolescent brain development. Okay, all right. The statistics are there. The physiology is more complicated. It has to do with while certain parts of the brain are plastic during adolescence, okay, right, you can basically rewire the brain, okay, right? You create more nicotinic receptors, and then that's what creates the addiction. Now, the statistics are really clear. Here's ages. This is when people started, okay? Hey, it's pretty well over by about 19 or 20. All right?
11 is growth spurt for boys.
Pardon?
It's consistent.
Yeah,
Growth
it
spurt
is.
is around 11 for boys.
Yes. Yeah, and then there's this document from the National Academy's Institute of Medicine includes work from Bonnie Halpern-Felsher, who's a professor here, and they go through in great detail. This was behind the age 21, okay, stuff, right? And the idea there was, you know, 18-year-olds are often still in high school. They buy the cigarettes, give them to their friends. Okay? By 21, they've kind of moved on. Anyway, it's just rock solid science. It's really, really hard to get addicted to nicotine after adolescent brain development. But they say the tobacco industry has known this for a long time. 3 years before Joe Camel came out was the importance of younger adults, and it's all spelled out in there. Younger adults, by the way, means 12 to 18. They don't say that, but that's what they mean. Okay, so this is the kind of stuff that Heartland would run. Here we go. They had a smokers lounge in 2006. That was a section of their website. Here was the thing in 2008. Here's a guy smoking about 2 feet away from a young girl. Okay, right? Hey, no problem with secondhand smoke. Right? Well, because all the science says something else, but that's okay, right? They're still getting money, at least as of 2012, because of a fish that got some of their documents. They're still getting money, and actually more than they were years ago. Oh, by the way, coal is just fine in fish in the environment. They get a lot of coal money too. Okay? Well, we'll skip this. This is what Joe Bass says all the time. No problem, no problem. We're good guys. Okay? All right, now, there's another one. You won't be able to read the details, but it shows the kind of stuff we do, which is here are funders at the top. Then the funds go to lots of think tanks. The think tank guys all write for each other, quote each other, you know, to show who's with it. These guys produce all kinds of reports and things. Legislators Guide, yeah. They send this thing called the Environment and Climate News to all of the state and local legislators. I checked that. They even sent them to the local Democrats. Okay, I asked them what they do, and they say, well, we throw them out. Okay, right? But there's a constant flow of stuff where they're trying to feed stuff to legislatures all over the place. They're all entangled with various folks. I say Michael Crichton's State of Fear, man, he was their favorite for years and years and years. They would run big ads that said, Michael Crichton was right. You know, Crichton's book basically says, you know, climate scientists are baddies, okay, right? And they have a big cabal and hoax and everything. And you know, when Crichton fashion, it was, you know, a good thriller, okay? But we also have a pretty good idea of who he was talking to get the climate stuff out. Anyway, these things are all intertangled like this, right? It's sort of like untangling some of the current political funding is that you find funny connections here and there that they really don't want you to know about. Okay, well, here's another one. And I want to say this. I have friends at George Mason University, but some parts of it might as well be Koch brothers subsidiaries. Okay? And but they also have done good stuff for the tobacco folks over years, right? There was this wonderful thing here. There was an economics network in the 80s, which basically was to find local university folks across all the states to testify at legislative meetings, okay, right? And so you can find the funding flows and who did what and how, well, XYZ looks good on paper, but he's not very good in front of legislatures. We need somebody else. Okay, right? Great stuff. Anyway, some of the crucial Koch think tanks are right there. One of them, the Institute for Humane Studies, is actually chaired by Charles Koch. Right? I mean, it's as a university, it's probably the key school for this kind of stuff. And law and economics places, but most of the places in normal university. Okay? Ed Maybach is a terrific researcher on climate communication. He's one of the ones who did that Yale Six Americas thing. Okay? Great guy. He comes out to American Geophysical Union meetings, and there's other folks there that are fine. It's just there's a couple places you're nervous.
Your last slide just before that one raises a question. If you go back to example 1.
Yeah.
So you have this guy, Bob Carter, and I see you have him Pacific, Australia, New Zealand. You have India question mark. And my question is, my impression is that in Europe, they're actually pushing smoking out of the various non-English speaking countries. And because of their health systems, they're trying to place greater emphasis on China even. And are you going to comment on that because of the fact that these are largely English language research?
Yeah, okay, well.
Is that India right there for?
Okay, the reason for the India thing is, okay, so right, you see the complexity of this chart. This is a tiny fraction of the connections and stuff that there is, okay, right? What happens is the English-speaking gang is very tightly coupled together. The climate denial and cigarette denial folks in Europe are pretty tightly coupled, but the language gets in the road some, okay? I've run across a couple things from India, not much, right? For the smoking side, okay, Bob Carter was a climate guy who's now dead, okay, right? There's a fairly strong climate and cigarette gang in Australia. They've been losing big. Australia did this thing called plain packs, right? I don't know if you know what it's a beautiful marketing. It's a terrible misnomer. All of the cigarette packages have to look the same with the same colors and fonts and sizes, okay, right? And the front of it has to have one of N really ugly pictures, okay, right? I mean, really bad stuff, okay, right? And the cigarette companies fought this like crazy, and I'll actually address this a little bit later. But Australia kept winning these battles, and other countries have been picking it up, okay? Indeed, the tobacco companies care about two things. One is making sure that they can addict kids in the window, because if they don't get them then, they will never be customers, okay? The second thing is keeping government as far away from healthcare as they can. Hmm? All right? That's why they got involved in building the Tea Party, okay, right? The idea is you want to have people able to say, well, somebody smoked and they died, but it's not me and I don't have to pay for it. If you think your taxes are going towards health care, all of a sudden you care more, okay, right? So those are the two things that they hate. And if you read the Poison Tea book, you can read about the attacks that they did on various health. I mean, those are the two things they care about, okay? All right, so China is definitely a problem. Here's a smoking problem, okay? 60% of Chinese men smoke. 50% of the doctors right? And the big dog of cigarette companies there is China Tobacco, which is owned by the state. Which could be slightly hard to regulate. Okay, all right. Okay, so the answer is, yeah, there's connections, and I have some names. I have a big spreadsheet that's got 1,000 names. Okay, right, and in different countries and things. But the focus here is more right here is more on the English-speaking ones, just because you can't do everything. I mean, if you did the whole chart for this, it'd be this whole room. Okay, now this is another one. Okay, and believe me, these folks are right in there. There's 3 groups: American Association of Physicians and Surgeons, Doctors for Disaster Preparedness, and the Oregon Institute of Science and Medicine. Okay, anybody ever hear of these entities? Yeah, well, you have. That's my wife. Of course you've heard it. Okay, because I talk about it all the time. Anyway, okay, this is an interconnected gang of folks, right? Okay, the AAPS absolutely believes government should have nothing to do with healthcare, period. It's just purely doctor-patient, okay? Nothing, okay, right? And by the way, they don't really like insurance companies either, and they certainly don't like medical review boards, okay? Got none of this. Doctors for Disaster Preparedness started decades ago, basically to help people prepare for nuclear war, right? But at least half of the sessions that they do, they have like a 2-day conference every year, 1 or 2 days. Half of the sessions are explaining why there's no problem with the environment, there's no such thing as global warming, blah, 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 okay? That's who the speakers are that they get. They get whoever they can get to do this. Why exactly 150 doctors need to hear that there's no such thing as global warming? I don't know, but that's who comes out for this. The Oregon Institute of Science and Medicine is a really jolly place. It's in Cave Junction, Oregon. It looks like a big barn. It has a list of faculty, although it's mostly Art Robinson and his sons. And the 2 faculty members listed at the beginning are both dead. They've both been dead for 10 plus years, okay? But they're still there, listed, you know. Art, this whole bunch was involved in a thing called the Oregon Petition. Anybody know about that? This was 30,000 people have signed a petition to say there's no such thing as global warming, okay, right? And a lot of them were fooled, but and they're presented as being scientists, but they're not. Art also runs for Congress every election for the last couple, funded by a fellow named Robert Mercer. Anybody know that name? Oh, Robert Mercer, okay, right? Well, in fact, Mercer apparently has attended meetings of DDP, okay, right? So we got some interesting folks here. These are the 2 who run it, and I've looked at hours of videos by these folks, and well, they're interesting, let us say, okay, right? Robert Mercer's embroiled, Ron Paul, Tom Price, right? Andrew Schlafly, anybody know that name? Know the name Schlafly? Yeah. Yeah, okay. Go look at Conservapedia sometime. Okay? Yes. Oh, great. Yes, okay. Yeah, recommended. Okay. Its connection with reality is minimal. Okay. Anyway, these folks are all in this sort of thing. There's multiple 501c3s. They publish stuff like, here's the journal of this thing. The AAPS publishes anti-climate stuff. Well, that's kind of weird. Okay, right? Anyway, it's like there's this whole gang of folks. This is about as far out as you can get. They say good things about cigarettes. They don't like vaccination. Okay, I mean, they don't like climate science. Blah. Okay. And, you know, Tom Price is in there. He's one of their favorites, okay, right? By the way, the FDA was about to put restrictions on e-cigarettes, and those were just delayed. Okay? Of course, that reports to him. Okay, this is a great report. I'll just mention it briefly. This did a much more serious later analysis of money flows. The crucial thing that went on here was actually something I actually discovered in 2012, is there's this thing called the Donors Trust, or Donors Capital Fund. Basically, this is a donor-advised fund. You give money to it. You still control where it goes, but only one person writes the check. So now you can't tell who gave what money to whom, okay, all right? And this was basically set up by Koch's and friends to anonymize where the money was going, because Charles Koch has hated the fact that his family foundation's gifts were ever had to be recorded, okay? And what you see here is these were funds going directly from their foundations. This was money coming out through donors' trust, and basically over the years the money shifted from direct up through donors' trust. Beautiful design. Okay, this is another one sort of looking at the future. The social cost of carbon. Now, there's a lot of work. John Wyatt does a lot of this at the Energy Modeling Forum, right? Where, figuring out how much it really costs to emit carbon dioxide is really hard work. There's lots of models. People try to thrash through the things to get something. And there was a great great set of hearings in Minnesota. And Minnesota's pretty hip, right? They had a law 20 plus years ago that you had to account for carbon, okay, right? And they set a fairly low price on it at that point because the people didn't know much, right? Well, a year ago they were having a big discussion, a big set of hearings. Peabody Coal, anybody know them? Peabody, okay, big coal company. It collected some of the classic climate deniers to come out and say why it all wasn't true, I analyzed the cases. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of pages. This is kind of where the mainstream is up here, 30, 40 kind of thing. In fact, a bunch of the oil companies for internal pricings actually use that, okay, right? These guys managed to all want it to be just a few dollars. In one case, they wanted it to be negative. That is, that you should be, that you should get benefits. You should get extra money from the fact that you're emitting CO2 because it's going to make everything better for plants. Okay, right? I mean, that's the idea. I'm an old farm boy, okay? Anybody know the thing Liebig's Law? Okay, Liebig's Law is, let's see, that the growth of a plant is limited by whatever is in least supply. This was about different fertilizers and so forth, okay, right? And it's sort of, the simplest thing is no amount of CO2 is going to make corn be good in the Sahara Desert, okay? Right? But these guys don't believe that, okay? There's a physicist at, he was at Princeton named Will Happer. He took over the George Marshall Institute, which is the focus of Merchants of Doubt, okay, right? And he is like, he's a member of the National Academy for Atomic Physics, but he's just like completely wrong and totally ideological on the climate stuff. Anyway, if you ever want to see the kinds of stuff that goes on to delay and create doubt, this is a good detailed example. And the interesting thing was, over here, Xcel Energy is actually pretty sensible, okay, right? And they actually, they do a lot of stuff with wind, okay, right? They want to phase out coal in a sort of disciplined fashion, right? And the judge actually liked, the judge, she was tough. She shredded these guys, the guys in pink up. Just it gladdened my heart about the judicial system. Great job by her. Okay, so here's some of the tactics. You do endless petitions. Fred Singer, did the Oregon petition with Robinson. If you want to get a feel for Robinson, Google Rachel Maddow, Art Robinson. There's some absolutely amazing video footage. Okay, she had them on, right? Let's see, there were attacks. Ben Santer's a great climate scientist at Lawrence Livermore, and they went after him in the Wall Street Journal in the mid-90s. At one point, he heard a noise at his door. When he came down, he found an eviscerated rat sitting there while somebody in a Hummer drove away. Okay, right? That's not much very fun, right? In the late 2000s, they did a strong effort to subvert the climate statements of science societies, the American Physical Society, American Chemical Society, the Geological Society of America, the IOP Physics Society in UK. Those are the ones I know about that I had some hand in helping stop, okay? But they went all out to try to get a small group of intense people in each society to push things into against climate science. They've often done things to try to subvert peer review into PAL review and then blame scientists for doing that. Okay, right? I did a big study on one of those. Okay, some of you have heard of the hockey stick curve, which is pretty straightforward use of paleoclimate data. And there's a tactic that's come out of that where you pick one scientist from a bunch that have done the work and you go after them full out. And you blame them for everything. They did it first with Ben, then Mike Mann got a big bullseye painted on his back. Now, as it turns out, Mike's a friend of mine, okay, right? He stayed at our house, for goodness sakes. It's made him way more famous than he would have been, okay, right? You know, being right and being attacked all the time actually makes you famous. But, you know, they even organized this thing called the Wegman Report. Anybody hear of that? Okay, all right. Wegman Report was basically a show trial in Congress done by Joe Barton of Texas, right? And they couldn't get, or they didn't want to get the National Academy of Science to do a study, so they got a George Mason University statistician and basically his grad students to do a report, and it was completely bogus. In fact, 30% of it was plagiarized. They even plagiarized one of the authors of the hockey stick, okay, right? Except they diddled things because they didn't like the conclusions. I mean, it's just amazing stuff, okay, right? Anyway, it was just completely bogus. I literally went through and annotated the whole thing, okay, right? And later, Wegman sued me about it, but that's okay, okay? He lost big, okay? ClimateGate. Now, this may sound familiar. Remember that, ClimateGate in 2009? Let me think what the mechanism was. Steal a bunch of email and then put it up starting on a Russian server. Does this sound, anybody hear anything like this? Okay, all right. And okay, now it looks like with the French, when they did this, they inserted bad documents as well, okay, right? Yeah, smart, yeah, okay, right. With this one, I don't think they did that. What they did is put up all the emails, but then they carefully selected things that if you knew the subject were nothing, okay, and just, you know, normal scientists arguing, okay, right? But you could make them look like there was something bad going on, okay, right? And, people looked at it, there were review committees and everything, and there was nothing, okay, right? But it caused a lot of flack in the meantime. And the sad thing was, mainstream media, quite naturally, didn't have the expertise to figure this out. Does that sound familiar too? Okay, right? And that's part of the way this works, is that if you go into what looks like technical weird stuff, you can put things over in it. You need the regular media to be good on their skepticism, and sometimes they're not, okay? Okay, now there's great use of the internet. Mark Morano is one of the hacks that I mentioned. He will often post some scientist's email address, and that's a signal to the folks who read his blogs, okay, to go attack, okay? And the next thing that happens is there's this wave of hate mail and stuff that comes, okay, right? I have at least a dozen friends who've been subjected to this at one thing or another. Now, as far as I know, nothing ever actually happens, but they really hassle people, okay? Let's see. Of course, this is plausible deniability. He just happened to put up the email address. He didn't tell them to do anything. Yeah, okay. Now, fortunately, fortunately, scientists are learning about this stuff. Early on, it was a terrible shock. Like for Ben, it probably contributed to breaking up his marriage, okay, right? I know of people that were really shocked and worried about this stuff. I've spent hours on phones with people under attack, you know, saying, okay, yeah, you know, yeah, they're coming through right now. In a week or two, they'll be gone. Okay, right? Nobody's gotten hurt. But, you know, let's work through this and everything. Okay, anyway, just a pain. Anyway, people have learned about this. I'm an American Geophysical Union member. I go to the meetings, the yearly meeting up here. They've gotten a lot better about understanding the tactics of this stuff. Okay, now, these guys are good about leading edge use of technology. Yeah, I know, I'm almost done, okay? 1991, the greening of planet Earth, and there's a link to that. Right here, this was a VHS tape they put out to the thousands of libraries in the US. The Western Fuels Association, which is Wyoming Coal, did this. Here's a link. This is the end part where they show that increased CO2 will green the Earth. You notice the Sahara Desert is green? Okay, right? Fine, yes, okay. Climate change, great, okay. Okay, 1997, there's a website by this guy here who lives in, he was not a scientist, lived in New Zealand. He did Still Waiting for Greenhouse, and it basically was a whole lot of those bad memes originate from there, although they fed stuff to him because he wasn't really a scientist. But he would crank this stuff out. And for quite a while, it was sort of one of the most popular websites because there wasn't much about it. Scientists did real science and published papers and stuff like that. This guy was aimed at other people, and he was a science advisor for the Western Fuels Association. Funny coincidence. Blogs really got going, I'd say, around 2006, and there was a huge outpouring of anti-science, climate anti-science blogs. There was the ClimateGate thing then, and since then, lots of social media. These guys are very quick on there. Okay? Both tobacco and climate and other things too. You know, as it's been harder to have ads on TV, the tobacco guys are very good about movie placements. They pay a lot of money to get things into movie. Of course, the internet is good. There's lots of ads and commercials you can have on there. All right? There's lots of websites that are support groups for smokers being hassled by people. You know, and these guys are good about moving to wherever there is it's not well controlled. Now, it's getting harder in the developed world to do that, but they're, of course, moving to the developing countries. The current estimate is, by WHO, is probably 1 billion people will die of smoking in this century. Okay? You know, there's 100 million last century, which puts them right up there with Stalin and Hitler, well, above. Okay? Okay, well, this is advice I give to scientists. You know, there are things like the Climate Science Legal Defense Fund, right? Everybody ought to watch Merchants of Doubt, right? That's a quick way to sort of get into this, and there are copies around on the web, right? I always tell people, if you get attacked, go quickly get advice from people who've been through this before, right? Now, a whole lot of younger climate scientists say the guy who helped me the most was Steve Schneider, that I said started me into this stuff. Union of Concerned Scientists is pretty good about this. Climate Science Legal Defense Fund is an entity that helps climate scientists with attacks. And you know, if Mark Morano publishes your email, hey, hate mail will come, but it dies down. Okay, I'm going to skip these detailed comparisons. So they don't like exposure much. Will Happer at Princeton does not like me. Believe me, he does not like me. Right? You sometimes can do academic misconduct complaints. I basically managed to lose his Wegman and his accomplice eventually lost their jobs as editors. Right? They filed $2 million lawsuits, and you know, we wiped them out basically. Right? And there have been complaints. Pardon? Well, it actually didn't cost me anything because CSLDF paid for it. Because they decided in this, it would have cost $45,000. Okay, right? They decided in the middle of this that I qualified as a member of the climate science community and they would help me out. Okay? Now, if things had already been settled, I would have probably gone directly to them to get legal help because they have a bunch of pro bono lawyers. But because of the speed requirements, it just happens I'm old buddies with some of the best lawyers who know this attacks on climate science, okay, right? Which I'm sure these folks had no idea I had those contacts, okay? And these folks are really good, okay? And I knew they would blow them away, and they did, okay? But this is the kind of stuff that goes on. There's a whole bunch of lawsuits and FOIA requests and stuff that are just complete nonsense that they use to harass climate scientists, right? I mean, FOIA generally open information is generally a good thing, right? But it can be misused in pretty grim ways, just completely chew up people's time, you know? And I have friends out at Arizona that are going through that right now. Okay, we talked about scripts here earlier. I went to a meeting, a workshop for a couple days at Scripps up on the bluffs. I mean, how many people have been to Scripps? Oh, lots, yeah, okay. This is a real hardship. You know, you have to sit up there, look at the Pacific, look at the La Jolla Beach, okay, right? You know, work, okay, right?
But the other direction, actually, it snowed in the mountains.
Yeah, well, you know, okay. Anyway, a great group this is the report that came out, right? This lady here is an American heroine, okay, right? Sharon Eubanks. She was the Department of Justice lawyer who drove the RICO suit against the tobacco companies, despite everything the Bush administration could do to try to make it go away, okay, right? Terrific lady, okay, she was there. She wrote a great book about this, right? Which is one of the ones in my first list. She's on the advisory committee up at UCSF with me, terrific, right? But it also showed how much effort it took to make that happen because the defenses against it were pretty fierce. Okay, so it was interesting though this last year, the coal companies all went bankrupt. Right? Mostly because of cheap gas, some renewables, also made a whole bunch of stupid investments. EPA, well, we'll see, you know, under the current government what can be done there. But I think an awful lot of that is this stuff, is the cheap gas and renewables keep getting cheaper. By the way, the coal companies have all given payments to these think tanks, you know, to help do this stuff, right? Some of it's visible, some of it's hard to find. I mentioned this thing with the social cost of carbon. Again, the judge just did not buy their arguments, right? She whacked them pretty good. I will note, very often, interesting legal actions start with the state attorneys general, right? And work their way up, and that's probably a good thing. Okay, so the tobacco guys built some anti-science machinery and tactics. They paid for it for a long time. Environmental anti-science have inherited a bunch of this, and it's often the same people. It is for sure a whole lot of the same tactics. Let's see. A difference is the climate anti-science has much more distributed funding. If you say, who's funding tobacco anti-science? Well, you start with Philip Morris and Reynolds, and then you work your way down, okay? And BAT, you know, the other guys, okay? With the climate science, obviously the fossil companies do it to some degree or other, but there's all these big family foundations that do it more for ideology, or there's a mix. The Kochs are both money and ideology. All right. There's this odd connection, you know, tobacco. You have to do it, you have to cut down trees. You sometimes take away farmland, all right? And then you burn more wood to cure the tobacco. Good, right. Anyway, what I'm finding is the tobacco control folks have been used to this stuff for decades. Right? They recognize tactics just like that. Okay? It's one of the reasons I go up to UCSF all the time. Climate folks have now sort of gotten on board and understand it a lot better because it's pretty alien to normal science. We hope it doesn't take as long as tobacco control because warming is kind of permanent. Again, you know, while there was some split 25 years ago, it wasn't so partisan as it is now, okay? Because it's really partisan. It's too bad. So I end up by thanking the folks up at UCSF for the tobacco archives. It's incredibly useful. Like I said, why do you think put an Exxon in the tobacco archives? Why does it get 20,000 hits? Now, so I don't know yet because I haven't researched it. It may be some tighter coupling in other places, but the crucial thing is 60% of cigarettes sold are through gas stations and convenience stores. Okay, and believe me, hey, big data, these guys, they know exactly where everything is. They know every gas station, okay, right? They track them. There's memos flying around about, you know, well, we've lost a little shelf space to this one gas station. I mean, guys are the best marketeers there are. Okay, so that finishes me up. And I guess we have time for a few questions. And the PDF, I gave you the PDFs here. Yeah. Sir.
So, wrapped up in all of this is internet related, of course, that classical print media has been letting go of their science people.
Yep.
I assume that includes all the fact checkers.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a real strong challenge to good journalism. Right? I mean, the age-old financial model is pretty badly broken. Right? Now, some of them are doing better. I think Washington Post and mostly the New York Times are pretty decent. There's plenty of smaller groups getting funded and growing up that aren't mainstream media that are pretty good at this stuff, but they're not mainstream media. Yeah. So I don't have a magic answer to that. I talk to journalism folks pretty often, and it's, the inability to do fact checking is a real problem. Of course, when it comes to science, it's really a problem. Right?
I would take issue with that. I would say the New York Times cares more about the font they use than having a science reporter.
Okay, well,
Really?
guys like Justin Gillis are pretty good.
Well, you're going to be with Markov here in about 20 minutes.
Yes.
Too, so, but I mean, talk to John. I mean, John's a little
Yeah.
cynical about it too.
Yes, okay, all right. But I mentioned like the two best I know of, okay? Because Wall Street Journal is really weird. Some of the reporting is actually pretty good, but the op-ed pages are hopeless on this stuff. I mean, there's an op-ed from this summer where Holman Jenkins basically said nicotine is an excellent drug, only mildly addictive. Well, okay, right? That's an op-ed page, right? Nobody's doing any fact checking on that. So the problem is, if it's a problem for those guys, you can imagine what it's like for a local newspaper. It's tough. It's tough. I wish I knew a magic answer, but it's tough. I don't know. New York Times, particularly this latest thing of hiring Bret Stephens, is pretty scary weird. I don't know. I thought they were trying hard to go more for better fact checking. Yes.
Is there any carryover on the privacy front, like the data brokers? Any links there?
Well, boy, that's a whole different thing. Okay, right? There's no doubt about it. This is why I mentioned the cigarette guys and their data stuff, okay, right? And those guys collect data like crazy. They want to get more personalized data. Again, I can't tell from what's out there on ICOS yet, on Philip Morris ICOS, right? There's no doubt about it that the technology is quite capable of gathering data about what you're doing and monitoring it and controlling it to optimize something. And I don't think that something is helping you stop. So you put that in an environment where there's multiple examples here of people having emails hacked or databases hacked, right? And it is a serious challenge. Yeah, it's a serious challenge. The one good thing, I guess, is that given the press on this last election, is that it's getting to be more visible to more people. Right? I mean, so nobody could ever prove that ClimateGate was a Russian thing. Right? And you know how it is. When people were giving it was Norfolk in the UK, they were giving the police a hard time saying, you didn't do enough to find who stole the emails. Okay, well, they didn't find out about it for a while. And I had to say, look, there's three cases. One, it was an inside job, which I don't believe for an instant, but if it was, they would find it. Second was, it was an amateur who left tracks, in which case they would find it real quick. And the third is, it was a pro job, in which case they would never find it. Okay? I said, hey, I doubt that if it was later and it was by pros, the Palo Alto police couldn't find it, even helped by the NSA. Okay, I've been in the NSA and the CIA. It's like, some of these things like Cozy Bear and the gangs over in Russia are really pretty good at this. And if you're not watching while it's going on, it's really pretty hard. Okay, so at least that made people get a little better about what they're doing. Sorry.
do you have a particular interpretation of the timing of ClimateGate, or whoever did it? Were they
Yeah, it was to knock,
experimenting, or-
they had the data from, most of the stuff was old. It was to cause trouble for the Copenhagen round of IPCC. It was very well timed.
There was Freakonomics last weekend, I think, or maybe it was a week ago, had an interesting discussion on climate stuff. If you haven't heard it,
I haven't heard
fish
it.
out the URL or something.
Yeah, although I've seen climate stuff from Freakonomics guys that did not impress me. So we'll see. Maybe they're better.
I've heard suggestions that a lot of the memes on Facebook, those questionnaires, what comic book character almost like, which king or queen almost like, are actually really data mining operations
Yes.
to get exactly that.
Yes, I believe that is true. I mean, obviously, one could have a whole talk on that sort of stuff, okay, right? But I have a Facebook login, but only so I can log in to comment on some things. I have no friends on purpose, okay, right? I don't put any information in there, okay, because I have reservations about the privacy viewpoint.
What on Facebook is not data mining?
Yeah.
You said-
The question is who for, and
Always
how.
ask the inverse
But
question.
it's not just Facebook, it's everything right now.
Yeah,
Yes.
Facebook
Right,
is
I mean,
data
your
mining.
data
Yes,
is
yes.
public, and get over it, right?
Yeah.
That's the way it is.
Why are there reservations?
What are reservations, yes, well, just exactly what this is, all data mining, yes, okay. Well, here's the thing, okay? So look, I've been sued for a couple $1 million, okay, all right? There are some people who really don't like some of the stuff that I've written, okay? And I'm not gonna make social networks obvious. I don't trust the security there.
So, on a more serious talk, I mean, the intertwinement of science and politics, right, has always been problematic. I mean, science has a pretty bad record, right, and historically speaking, right, they wanted to burn all kinds of people. When Neptune was discovered, everybody was looking for planet Vulcan, right? And
Yes.
Einstein came along. And so science is not that great, right? And if you look at what the fascists did, what the communists did, right, with science in the Soviet Union and in Nazi Germany, right? So what makes this different? Well, why do you think that that this is right science and it's not just your ideology, right? And you're a victim of confirmation bias like we all are. Right, you're looking for what you like, and other people look for what they like. Smoking is bad, probably, right? 99%, right? And but so are many other things, right? Religion hasn't been particularly good for humanity, right? And yet it's out there and it's protected and so on and so forth, right? So what's your point? So.
Well, the point is, the basic physics say that where we are will be underwater. Huh?
The planet, no, so.
Okay, so Miami will be gone,
Yeah,
right?
so the planet is warming and that is bad,
Yes.
right? That's bad, yeah.
And so, let's see, I have a set of bookshelves this high. I have a whole lot of friends who are members of the Academy of Sciences in climate science. I go to AGU meetings, right? I read tons, I have heavily marked up IPCC stuff. The science is very solid, right? And the question is, we can just let we can let things just proceed, and the level of damage to the planet is really pretty high. Well, it's not so much the planet will still be here, okay, right? But the United States especially is rich in part because there's a huge amount of coastal infrastructure that's going to be flooded out. Now, if you don't
Not
care,
so much.
that's okay.
Most of humanity is close.
No. Yeah, for instance, Russia is in pretty good shape. St. Petersburg is the one big city on the coast. It has the benefit of post-glacial rebound. Right? It's actually going up a little bit. Right?
Is that significant?
Pardon?
Is that significant on the scale of
Okay.
ocean going up?
Well, it's certainly significant on the scale of Vladimir Putin's life.
But China and India are in pretty bad shape.
Right? China's the other one that gets, the two countries that have huge amounts of coastal infrastructure, us and China. Right?
In India.
Right?
India has.
Oh, India's pretty bad. India's got, gonna have more problems too, yeah. Like Mumbai is toast.
Really bad shape.
What?
The Maldives are really
Well,
bad.
yeah. But if you look at the financial losses, not the human life losses, as Chris Field here, anybody know Chris? Okay, right? So Chris runs the Woods Institute, but he was the founding director for the Carnegie Department of Global Ecology, and he really knows his stuff, right? And the way he puts it is, the monetary losses will be in the developed countries, the human life losses will be in the poorer countries, which is what will happen. Bangladesh, yeah. But we and then China. I mean, anybody here been to Shanghai? Yeah. Okay. Well, I've been along the Bund there. Okay, right. Yeah. That is a huge metropolitan area with several rivers coming out. That's at sea level.
Can they build dikes?
Okay. Well, I'm not sure about there. The problem with Miami and dikes. It's limestone. It's porous limestone. You can't build seawalls. The water just comes up. Oof. Okay.
Well, I like what the Dutch said actually about New Orleans after Katrina, when they came by, and they said, "Our problem is we have water on one side. Your problem is you have water on 3 sides.
Yeah, right.
You guys are crazy."
Yeah. Well, I've talked to some of the Dutch folks. There's Dutch folks running around over here. I've talked to that do business. They say we're looking forward to a lot of good business. Google sometime Netherlands floating houses. And they've been engineering those for quite a while.
The real problem isn't just loss of life, but the conflicts caused by.
Well, there's the migration issues. Yeah. Okay. People are starting to try to figure out what happens if a whole lot of folks at low levels on the U.S. coasts have to migrate someplace, and even there it's interesting. Bangladesh, of course, is worse. Yeah. Mumbai is not. Anybody ever been to Mumbai? It's like not very high. Okay, right?
San Jose is pretty low too.
Yeah. Well, I said, yeah. I mean, right here is okay, but for a while, right?
Well, our problem is the Sacramento Delta. That's our problem.
Yeah, our problem is Sacramento Delta.
Take the mic off and then you can tell the truth. It's all good.